What's up, everybody? Welcome back. Another episode of the Microcast. On this week's episode, we're going to talk about season planning and organizing your race season around a specific race goal. And to help me do that, I've got a very special guest, Microcosm Coach Zack Russell. Zack is a certified running coach, athletic trainer, strength coach. His list of the list of qualifications goes on and on. But I'm super excited to welcome Zack to the podcast and have a great discussion with him about planning for your A race and what a season should look like. And to warm us up, as usual, we're going to do a little hot or not. Zack, you ready for some hot or not?
Let's do it. Ding, ding, ding.
All right. I wanted to have a couple questions here that kind of I felt like we're in your area of expertise as an athletic trainer.
Okay.
Hot or not, stretching for runners and endurance athletes?
I'm going to go with hot on this one. I think with stretching, dynamic stretching is huge before runs. I mean, I'm someone that wakes up at probably 4 o'clock in the morning and rolls out of bed, throws on some shoes, drinks a shot of espresso, and goes out the door without stretching. And I think that is probably not the way to go. I think getting in some leg swings, doing some high knees and things like that can be super beneficial, especially in the cold winter months that we're in now. And then the other side of that is static stretching. I think that is a poor concept to do before running, but afterwards, I think it's great when the muscles are warmed up and they're elastic. You can get a little stretch in. I think for me, what I've found is after key, like really tough workouts or long runs, being able to get in those stretches afterwards kind of promotes my recovery and healing process kind of throughout the day. What about you, TJ?
Yeah, nice, man. I'm kind of in the same boat. I'm a huge fan of a dynamic warm up.
Okay.
I'm all about it. Trying to just stay within my range of motion. That way, the muscles get warmed up. I get ready to go. I kind of prime for the work that's coming, but I'm also not trying to like improve my mobility or my range of motion. I do, personally, I do I do a small amount of stretching, after training. And, the research that I've seen on this topic is, pretty strong with regard to like, hey, let's make sure we do static stretching if we're trying to actually improve range of motion. Let's do that after the run, because when you work through the muscles range of motion and then you work beyond your range of motion, you're starting to lose some muscle tension. Mm-hmm. And then that can really work against you in terms of like feeling snappy on your runs and overall just having good running economy.
Yeah. And I think, if any of you have ever watched, professional track meets, all the sprinters, when they're kind of getting in their gates, they're jumping up and down and popping. They're not standing there touching their toes. So yeah. I think there's something to look at there.
Yeah, totally. Well, along the same lines, what do you think about foam rolling? Hot or not?
I'm hot. I think that you need to learn to get off the couch sometimes, get on the floor, and do some foam rolling.
Yes.
I think that it's good for the muscles. It breaks up the scar tissue. There's a lot of that we as athletic trainers do, whether it's, people know it as scraping, cupping, foam rolling, all that kind of stuff. I personally have a vibrating foam roller, which I am personally obsessed with, and do spend a lot of time with that. But I think it's good. Your body needs elasticity when you're training or running. But there's kind of this window of elasticity that you want. You don't want to be too flexible, and you don't want to be too stiff, because that could lead to injury on either side of that spectrum. So having the elasticity that I think a foam roller helps with can be beneficial. Are you hot or cold on this one?
Yeah, I'm hot on this one as well. I know, just there's not a ton of research around foam rolling, but I'm I'm an advocate for things that make people feel better as athletes. Like if it helps you tune into what areas of your body are sore or not, or something that I need to work on X, Y, and Z. Well, I figured that out because like I actually got on the floor and checked in with my body via the foam roller. I think it's an awesome tool for that. I have seen some stuff around the importance of fascial release and making sure that you're not have all this tension built up in your fascia,
Mm-hmm.
and foam rolling can be really helpful for keeping those areas loose. I do, as far as I know, that's kind of an emerging area of research, and so there's not like a unanimous like yes, do foam rolling for this. Like people also do scraping for that, and there's other techniques as well. Manual release and massage can sometimes do the same thing. But I just think having a way to like facilitate some recovery, check in with yourself can be really helpful. Oh yeah, hey, I am a little bit more sore here, or oh yeah, my IT bands are like much tighter than I
Mm-hmm.
thought. Maybe I need to work on the insertion point here. Um, any kind of device that you have that's going to help you do that and kind of maybe get off the couch, get out of your like office chair. I think it's just going to be really beneficial for athletes.
Yeah, I found that if I just like lay on the floor for like 5 minutes, then I might grab the foam roller. So, yeah. So next topic. How about going to the chiropractor? Let's start with you, TJ. Hot or not?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm undecided. I'm undecided about this because I don't necessarily recommend it to athletes. I don't think it's like going to the chiro is maybe once or twice in over 5 years of doing this full time. I've been like, I think you should see a chiropractor. I'm usually much more in alignment with like, all right, let's get that checked out by a PT. And that's not to say, chiropractic care doesn't have its benefits. I myself have seen chiropractor many times. But I don't know. I think it's been helpful for me, but I can't
Mm,
always point to where is the signal and the noise here. I do know that my relationship with the two PTs that I see a lot is um something I really lean heavily into. So I I don't want to say not hot. And I know people out there who are listening don't like they like a black and white answer. They want to hear it's hot or it's not, but I feel like I'm down the middle on this. Like if you think it works for you, again, like it's like the foam roller, use it. Um, but if you maybe are skeptical, I think it's all about the person you build the relationship with, which is kind of why I stick to the two PTs I work with. What do you think?
I'm gonna go with an ice cold biofreeze kind of cold on this
Oh, it's
one.
not hot. It's
Not
not
hot.
hot. Okay, all right.
So this topic, going to the chiropractor, it makes me think of back when I was a kid, and everyone used to say, "Oh, don't crack your knuckles because you're going to get arthritis in your hands." And so it brings me back to the point of don't crack your back because it's probably not good for you. Um, but on the caveat to this, that there are some good chiropractors out there that their first concept of being a chiropractor is not adjustments. They prescribe exercises. um, I personally interned with a chiropractor and she was great. They would do a lot of functional movement screens and things like that. So I think if you're out there looking for chiropractor or another addition to your treatment plan or thing, I think there are some good ones out there. Personally, working in the spine industry with a spine doctor, there are some mixed reviews. I've seen slip discs from chiropractors and some other things. So just be weary of who you're going to see when you go to the chiropractor. I'm definitely along the lines with TJ that I think a physical therapist is certainly knowledgeable and can kind of help you with any ailments or injury niggles that you're having.
Yeah, it's funny. The two PTs that I see, I feel like there isn't a whole lot that the PT can't do that the chiropractor does. Like
Yeah.
a lot of the same things that the chiro does. If I request my PT to do it, they both of them they tend to be able to do it, which is super cool.
Yeah.
And the thing that I don't like is the chiropractor can't do the dry needling, which is something that like I've really relied on as an
Mm-hmm.
athlete, and both my PTs can dry needle. So
Yeah.
sparkling water, hot or not?
I'm hot on this. I think anything that can make you hydrated is a good thing. I was actually talking with the physician I work with today about this topic, and he was telling me that, for example, Diet Coke, the caffeination or the sparklingness of it actually helps you absorb the caffeine better.
Oh wow, I had no idea.
And so I wonder if that would be the same with like a caffeinated sparkling water, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah, I'm hot on this. I think that sparkling water is a good way to get an alternate source of fluids in. I don't know, I don't know the science behind whether it adds to your hydration status or gets you hydrated or anything like that. But for me, I like to have one with dinner. Personally, my favorite flavor is the LaCroix Limoncello.
Wow.
So
Nice.
TJ, what is your thought on this topic?
Yeah, everybody knows I'm hot on sparkling
Oh
water.
yes.
Yeah, definitely. I'm a go-to sparkling water drinker. I got hooked on sparkling water just going to Europe, and seeing there was a town I was in Italy where in the town park, like in the square of the city, they had a fountain that had still and sparkling water coming out of it. And I was just like, wow, this is
That's like Manitou Springs. They have these natural hot springs there. I think there's like 8 of them in the town, and each of them tastes a little bit different. But
yeah. But do
so
they have
mineral water,
sparkling?
it's just got some fizz to it.
Okay, all right. Well, they know what they're doing then. Yeah. I also like. I think it really helped me at Leadville. Um, at a couple of the aid stations later on in my race, I
Mm.
pounded a couple of sparkling waters. I don't know if that maybe or didn't lead to the throwing up that was happening later, but in the moment, it felt like the only thing that could like really like satiate my thirst.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the bubbles were like really refreshing, so it was like a nice way to kind of like
Mm-hmm.
cleanse my palate or mix things up. Um, so I'm big into it. I'm hot on
Okay.
sparkling water.
Well, that leads us to our last topic, non-alcoholic beer. And to go off what TJ said, I used NA beer, specifically Athletic Brewing, during my Leadville 100.
Did you really?
I did.
You drank any beer during 100?
I did.
No way.
It was a good palate cleanser. I didn't brush my teeth. I felt like an NA beer did the trick for me. I'm not a Courtney Dauwalter type, but no, it did me well. The taste of an IPA, it just helped the other foods go down well, and just kind of got the nasty sugar taste out of my mouth. So I think a little bit of bitterness from the beer was good.
Nice.
And for me, also too, to go off this, during tough training season, especially in the summer, I don't have much appetite for beer. I like the taste of beer, and so that's where I turn to NA beers.
Yeah, yeah. And this podcast is not sponsored by any NA beer companies, but if you're listening, you want to send us some samplers, we'd be very interested in in letting you know how they work for athletes. I think one of the things that is interesting, why I'm really hot on NA beers is because often as athletes, we kind of have this connection of enjoying a beer after a big like event.
There's a stigma around it.
Yeah, there is
Mm-hmm.
definitely, and I feel like as I don't drink much alcohol anymore. Can't remember the last time I had a drink, and maybe it was New Year's. I had a beer. I think I had a beer on New Year's, but I do like you. I like the taste of beer, and so an NA beer is a great option for me because I don't wake up feeling like crap in like kind of the for like what I think about is the value proposition around like drinking alcohol. Like, is it worth it or is it not? Is it in alignment with my values? And like, if I want to show up as the best athlete, coach, partner, creator, best like person, best version of myself, like I can't really drink because I feel like I'm a step too slow the next day. And so, you know, like I like the taste of beer. NA beers are great. And I kind of digress there, but like thinking about like the connection between beer and doing sports outside, I think about this a lot. Like, finish that really great like bike ride up at Fruta, and you look around the parking lot and people are like tailgating with beers, or you know, they serve beer at the finish line of a lot of races, although they are starting to serve more NA options now, which is super, super cool. And I think that there is like a cultural thing around like having a beer. But if you think about alcohol and the way it works, it kind of works to down regulate your system. It's not, it doesn't bring you up. It's a depressant. And so the way that it works in your brain is something important to think about. You know, did I just finish something and I felt really great about it, and then my inclination was to grab a beer? Oh, why did I do that? Is that because like, you know, maybe I feel more comfortable kind of in this other state where I'm not quite so high. So I've thought about that a lot for myself, really, and just I feel like for me, something that's important for like my growth as a person is to try to like stay in those high moments as long as possible. So like try not to do things that down regulate me, like drinking a beer. You know, there's plenty of other ways we subconsciously down regulate ourselves as people. For example, you might be having a great day, totally crushing it, like your coaching's going well, or your running is going well, or you just got a promotion at work, and then all of a sudden, you know, you find yourself in your kitchen having an argument over nothing with your partner. And it's like, oh yeah, like you know, that just manifests to down regulate me back to this other state rather than staying in that high point. And so like I like to think about like trying to stay in that high point as often as possible, try to stay away from the things that maybe are going to down regulate me. That way I can make those high points, like I can eventually make that my floor, you know. Just something I've been thinking about around alcohol use.
And to add on that, I've always wondered why they called it happy hour. Happy hour tends to be a bunch of coworkers and friends get together and gossip and talk about everything in the world. That never seems very happy to me.
Right. But a lot of venting, heavy venting.
Yeah. Anyways.
Well, it's good to externalize.
So, season planning.
Yeah, let's get into it. Let's get into it.
Winter here in Carbondale. Well, actually, it's like 40 in January, which is pleasant. And we're getting up on race season. TJ, what do you have planned this year?
Well, hopefully Western states. Okay. Yeah. And what about you?
Well, I just got off the wait list for Run Rabbit, so I will be in Steamboat come September.
Awesome. Hell yeah.
But, anyways, to set up this conversation, say, TJ, that you have an athlete, say, running 100 milers, such as our local Leadville 100. It's a big race. It's up high. It's at altitude. It can be hot at times. It can be rainy at times. You never know when you're at 10,000 feet. There's so many factors to think about in an athlete that signs up for this race. What are kind of your first maybe questions or thoughts that you have about an athlete that signs up for a race like this?
Yeah. And like, you know, listeners, feel free to like insert if you're self-coaching, or if you're working with a coach and somebody who's outside the Microcosm, you know, organization. I think this conversation can be really helpful. Insert your A race. You know, it doesn't have to be Leadville. It could be Western States or Run Rabbit, or it could be, you know, any number of other races, but just insert, you know, I like starting with like, when we're giving an example of this, starting with like, oh, the biggest possible example. Like, okay, let's take a big race like Leadville.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be 100 either. It can be a 50K if that's big for you, or 50 miler, or it could be a marathon on the trails.
Yeah, totally. I think the first thing I do when an athlete comes to me with a big race like that, I think
Mm-hmm.
about what is our timeline for preparing for this race.
Mm-hmm.
And so often I will fast forward way ahead to when that race is. And I'll be looking at this in the Training Peaks calendar and I'll be like, okay, here's that race. It is X number of weeks away. And maybe for the sake of this conversation, we'll say it's 16 weeks away, that race that we're going for. We're 16 weeks out from Leadville. You know, that's not true. It's January. We're not 16 weeks out from Leadville. Nobody be worried. But hypothetically, say we're 16 weeks out and I'm looking at that calendar. And I think the first thing I'm going to do when I start to see the calendar and the timeline we have is ask the athlete, what are your goals for
Mm-hmm.
this race?
Mm-hmm.
What do you do in that situation? Do you ask a similar question?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I've found as an athlete, as a coach, is you've got to have a rhyme or reason for what you're doing. I think that the biggest thing is purpose. And so, say, you sign up for Leadville 100. Okay, well, first question is, okay, what is your purpose for signing up for this race? Is it to finish? Is it to, run at the front of the pack? Are you raising money for, a charity cause? Or are you just going out there because you saw some video on YouTube and saw a guy with no shirt and long Jesus hair running around trails and decided that that was something you wanted to do? I mean, you've got to find the purpose before you can develop a plan. And so that's kind of where my initial thoughts go, kind of like your intentions for the race.
I like
Um,
that. I like that. Because
so,
I think that's important for guiding athletes, setting expectations, and then particularly like when we get into the nuances of setting up the plan. What your level of engagement is in that race,
yeah, it's a
your level,
motivator.
right, and your
Mm-hmm.
level and how you're prioritizing it. I think is going to largely it can influence some of the other steps in the planning process and what you
Mm-hmm.
do to prepare, right? So like,
Mm-hmm.
an athlete who just wants to finish might be less likely to set more intermediary goals between where they
Mm-hmm.
are and where that race is. They might be more focused on the outcome rather than maybe some of the internal processes around like going for a goal like that. Like, what am I going to learn from this? How will I grow as an athlete? How will this force me to transform?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I do think that that's such an important question. Like, you can't really, I don't think you can really get anything out of a race, a big race, without like, if you actually want to get something out of it, you better know why you signed up. You better know what your purpose is,
Yeah.
right? Like, you better know your reasons behind it. Because when you're training for something that's really difficult, say Leadville, Run Rabbit, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
Leadville. This is the example of Leadville. When the going gets tough, what are you going to lean on?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you got to lean on intrinsic motivation as well as extrinsic motivation. The
Yeah.
extrinsic is Leadville, finishing that race, but the intrinsic is the deeper stuff that really resonates with who you are as a person, as an athlete.
Mm-hmm.
Any specific like things you do as a coach to try to like maybe coax out a purpose from an athlete, or a why behind why they might be doing a race like this? If they're, I don't know, maybe they have a little trepidation around sharing, or they're not quite sure, they haven't organized their thoughts. Maybe they started
Mm-hmm.
along this journey thinking like, yeah, Leadville is a hell of a goal. It'd be really cool to accomplish. I've seen some, people in my group or on
Mm-hmm.
social media like running this race, and that seems like something I want to do. But they haven't gone like to that next level. They haven't gone to that deeper side.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think everyone deep down inside has like a reason for signing up for something. Even if you did see like the YouTube video and you saw someone running, like I think that there's always something that people are like searching for. And so, what is it that you're searching for that has led you to do this race? I think, some people are, like they sign up for Leadville to like lose weight and like that's their goal and that's awesome. And then, we kind of target that. for me personally as an athlete, like I'm very like no one has to tell me to go out and run. I'm just gonna go do it anyway. And I like absolutely love. We were just talking about this. I love doing intervals. Like I'll wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning just so I can do intervals. And so everyone's gonna have their own goal. Some people want to go out and just have fun and enjoy the experience. Some people want this whole life changing experience with it. And so in talking with an athlete, you kind of talk about, okay, well, what is your history, and you get to know them throughout the process, and you kind of determine that goal. I don't think initially at the onset of signing up for that race you have to have this predetermined goal, but I think over the process that goal sometimes is formulated,
Mm.
and that can be getting a whole bunch of friends to crew you through this race and making it a fun time, and then to go along with this goal, like there's milestones that you hit throughout, and so yeah.
Nice. I like that nuanced approach to finding your why and your purpose, and that sometimes, it can start as wanting to accomplish the thing and that being the primary motivator or the driving force behind it. And then, throughout that process, developing your purpose and the why, or uncovering it. Maybe it was, like you mentioned, maybe it was there, but it was below the surface and you weren't quite aware of it. So you needed to just embark on the process of working towards that goal
Mm-hmm.
for you to become aware of what that is, or to bring clarity to it. And yeah, like, and I can look back as in, my, 5 years, kind of, not a short amount of time, being a full-time coach, but also certainly it's not decades of coaching, runners at Leadville. And I can say for sure I've had runners on all sides of that spectrum where,
Mm-hmm.
They weren't quite sure of what their why was or their purpose was behind the individual race at first, but then we worked to uncover it throughout the process. And then having that understanding going into the race gave them that special sauce to
Mm-hmm.
like kind of work through the deeper challenging parts of doing 100 miles that are, inherent in doing that thing. So yeah, I think that was well said, that sometimes this stuff can come out as you do it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you alluded to, developing some of these intermediary goals along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what's your process for helping athletes develop those guideposts, so they can check some boxes along the route to preparing for Leadville to help them kind of sure up their competence
Mm-hmm.
with regard to being prepared for the race?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things that I like to do with my athletes for this. One is pretty simple, and it's pretty easy. Is I like to have them do a 5K um, throughout the year, and have it on the same route, and do that every 2 months or so. And so as they're training for this race, they are running this same route every 2 months, and they're seeing progress. They're seeing their times get faster. They're seeing it gets easier and things like that. And then also pointing out, like with interval training or long runs, like, hey, look, like this is getting easier for you. And do you see that in your approach? Not just, prescribing, 16, 18, 20 miles each week, but actually saying, hey, look, like, do you notice this getting easier? And that sort of thing. And then I also like to incorporate, trying to make training fun sometimes. Like, for example, I had an athlete last year who oftentimes on his long runs, he would run long and he would have his girlfriend go ride his bike and meet him at certain points along the way, and give him water and things like that. So, making the training fun for the athlete, I think is a great way to do it. And so that it doesn't become this monotonous process of repeating a lot of things every week. They're seeing progress in their training. They're seeing their times get faster, and things get easier. So,
Yeah.
what about you, TJ?
Yeah, well, I first of all, I love the idea of having an athlete get familiar with like a specific route, like that 5K route.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because often like a great sign of progress for an athlete is like, well, I did that same easy run that I've always done, but I was a few minutes faster today.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like at the same effort level or less. It's like wow, that's a great indication that you're getting fitter, you're getting more economical, and that the training is really working. It's helping to take you from where you are to where you want to go. We're filling the
Mm-hmm.
gap in between those two spaces. Um, Man, I think that that's sweet. Like, if you're an athlete listening to this, like, you gotta have like daily, those daily routes in your back pocket that you're
Yeah.
consistently repeating as a way to help yourself self-evaluate, to know, and to also give that feedback back to your coach, like, oh yeah, this route that I'm doing, yeah, I'm getting better at it. Like,
And even if you're self-coach too, like it helps you evaluate, like, well, am what I doing and what I reading or what AI is giving me, is
AI.
is this progress? Like, am I progressing? Am I getting better? Like if you have, like a 10-mile loop that you do on the trails or something like that, repeating that often throughout your training cycle, whether it be like, you do it at 12 weeks, 6 weeks, and 3 weeks out from your race to kind of see, did I progress over this time period?
Yeah.
And I think that's crucial. And then also too, the same with races. I think that, seeing an athlete repeat maybe one race every year, as like a long-term goal process and looking long-term, maybe you sign up for 7 races, but you always are doing this one race every year. You see progress at that one race. So it doesn't have to be, just within this one year. It can be long term like that too.
Totally. Yeah, it's so important to have those macros there, so
Mm-hmm.
you can kind of see, well, here's how one year compared to the next, and how, ideally we're continual. It's a
Mm-hmm.
process of continual growth. And not every year is always going to have the same results as previous years, because things can happen. Races have a lot of unknowns, but in general, we want that line to be trending upwards.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing, like when training for a race like Leadville, if you're in that 16-week period out from a race, we kind of want to be having that line trending upwards, upwards in fitness gains, upwards in competence in the terrain, and feeling equipped and ready to go the distance. We're building that throughout that training time. We're not trying
Mm-hmm.
to prove that, we're trying to build on that.
Yeah.
So I tend to like take the goal and work back from it. So I'll work with the athlete to ideally set some like pretty, um, not lofty, but and not rigid, but very specific goals.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, if you're doing Leadville and it's 16 weeks out, um, I'll often work back 5 weeks from the race. 5 weeks out from the race, I'll incorporate a pretty high volume boot camp weekend,
Mm-hmm.
which would probably include 10, 12 hours of training over the course of that weekend. An athlete could race on the Saturday and do a short, and do a long run on Sunday, or maybe they're going to do 3 long runs in a row, depending on their level. But I try to always keep that like 5 weeks out from the race as that boot camp weekend. And then I continue to move kind of like on that timeline.
Mm-hmm.
When would be an ideal time for a stepping stone? Okay, how about a 50 miler or 100K? I mean, that's a pretty logical
Mm-hmm.
goal to get you prepared for the 100. Great window for that is usually about 10 to 12 weeks out from a race, because it gives you time to do the race, to recover, to get back into training, and then start to build again. And then you also have that timeline of, around 6 weeks or so left in training, where you
Mm-hmm.
can incorporate anything you learned from that 50 miler or 100K into your training, to make
Mm-hmm.
it part of your process, so that you can bring it into the 100. And I think that's really key. A mistake I kind of see self-coached athletes make is the timeline with that longer race is too close, and so they'll either burn the candle at both ends, and they'll end up starting the 100 miler too tired,
Mm.
or they won't have had any time to really meaningfully incorporated any insights they got from that race into their training, to have established the new habits and the new routines, because
Mm-hmm.
those things take time, especially if we're talking about stuff like nutrition, which we'll get into in a couple minutes here. But it's vital to have time to train those systems. If you don't have enough time, it's a rush job and it's going to show up on race day like you didn't prepare.
Right.
And I keep working it back, so say you're 10 or 12 weeks out from that race and you pick a 50 or 100K, ideally something on similar terrain to the 100 miler. But if we want to go further out in the training, what would be another supportive stepping stone for that 50 miler or that 100K? Yeah, it could be a marathon on trails, or it could be a 50K on trails. And, ideally having that 4 or 5 weeks out. I'd say probably more like 5 or 6 weeks out from that 50 or that 100K. So again, the same thing. We've got a big focused weekend of training. We get that stimulus, we rest, and we start to think about the insights from that event. What did we learn? What can we take away to go into the 50? And we use that as like a way to step up to the 50. And then the 50 helps us step up to the 100. I mean, that would be really ideal. But that's not ideal for everybody, because
it's ideal for a single man like me.
Yeah.
But it's not ideal for, an athlete that has family. And I think that there's different ways to approach it that we as coaches with Microcosm kind of have to think about. I think, say you have Leadville on the calendar, but you can't get in a big training weekend. You can't get in these big 50-mile races. Maybe there's nothing local to you. I think, picking out, a couple different options. You do a big route option near your house. Say, you kind of fuel it on gas stations if you live, on the plains or something like that, and it's flat and you can bounce around to different ones. You can kind of create your own race that way. I think great ways to lead up to 100 miles. You don't always have to do your calendar doesn't always have to go from a short race all the way to a long race. Like I think doing several 50Ks or several shorter races can really dial in just standing on a starting line.
Yeah.
Like I think sometimes for people, their anxiety is so high standing on a starting line. So the more that you can repeat that, whether it be, local 5Ks or 10Ks or, getting out at your local race series, I think is a great way to do that for a time crunched athlete. I think also too, they don't always have to run, 70 miles every week or, whatever it takes to run 100. If you're hitting kind of these shorter intensity sessions, and then, I think that develops an athlete more than, trying to bang out a 20 miler on the weekend, then they don't do anything for 4 days.
Yeah.
And so the mileage, I don't think is always, crucial and key component to some of these longer races. It's a lot about, consistency, getting in kind of the speed work, those variables that are going to, increase your, efficiency as a runner, increase your speed, and make you a little bit faster, I think are good for that. And then other ways, trying to incorporate your family into your training too. I've seen moms riding around or running around and their kids are falling behind on a tricycle or something like that. There's fun ways that you can incorporate your family into it. You don't have to, use it as an escape from them. I think bringing them into it is a great idea.
Yeah, integrate your community. And I think the great thing about having a coach, right, is you can sit down and talk about, okay, here is the idealized version of the plan. We we do that 50 or that 100K 10 to 12 weeks out from the race. 5 to 6 weeks before that, we do, a 25 mile or a 50K. Okay, that's the idealized version, but, with the actual constraints that you have in your life, is this possible? And okay, if so, what would you like to do? Okay, great. Let's do those things. But if they're not possible for you, what can we do? Like you mentioned, what is possible for me to do is to race a bit more frequently, but it's going to be shorter. Okay, cool. So we can work that in. How do we work that in? Well, maybe we do a longer long run after that shorter race. So you kind of get that back-to-back stress that's going to help you work on your durability as a runner and keep your training hours high without the stress of traveling or having to go somewhere that, doesn't work for you.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many ways to do it, like I love to have an idealized plan, where it's like, okay, in the best case scenario, we could do this.
Mm-hmm.
And then, using that as a guide, because often the athlete's looking for guidance, and then we'll have to like they'll start to develop, okay, well, I can't prioritize that at that time, but you know what, I can prioritize this at this time.
Mm-hmm.
And like ideally, the coach is gonna like give them that blueprint far enough out. That's why we're talking about like this, at least a 16-week timeline for
Mm-hmm.
this conversation, because the athlete needs to plan ahead. Hardly anybody that we're coaching or that we know is a professional runner.
Mm-hmm.
Most folks that we know, or that we work with at Microcosm, are doing this within the constraints of other jobs, and other priorities, competing priorities at
Mm-hmm.
times, other responsibilities. So, when you bring all that into play, hopefully you provide that blueprint for the athlete, so that way they can see, okay, here's where like I really shouldn't sacrifice on my training. I'm 12 weeks out from the event. I'm going to like, bank time, like household chores, time with the family. I'm going to bank that in the months before, and I'm going to like organize it with my wife or my spouse or my partner,
Mm-hmm.
whoever, that like, I'm going to like, as soon as I recover from this race, like I'm going to double down on those things around the house. Cause I know like this is the period where I got to do the work to allow me to have the outcome that I want, which is ideally completing this race.
Mm-hmm.
And then just trying to have those communicative conversations where, you can kind of find the middle ground of how that works, like within someone's actual life who isn't a professional runner who's doing this, every day, and it's the only thing they do.
Yeah.
I think that like I found as a coach that the more open you are with athletes, like here's what the idealized plan looks like, but this isn't the only route to you being successful at this race. What can you commit to and what can't you commit to? Let's talk about this, and then let's problem solve, and let's figure out a way to make it work.
Yeah.
What do you think about the other aspects of training, like dealing with the altitude, dealing with heat, dealing with nutrition? When do you bring those things in to your training with your athletes? How much do you focus on those things as part of that blueprint or that plan for a year?
Yeah. I mean, one approach I take is to kind of take, so you have a race goal. You want to be less specific the further out from the race, and then you become more specific as you get closer to the race. And that can be with training, for example, you do your VO2 far out from the race. That way you raise your ceiling, and then you kind of build underneath that ceiling as you're getting towards the race. Longer runs are typically towards your goal race when everything's kind of trained up.
Right, like close to the race. Yeah.
Yeah, and then, with these, I mean, you've got to be thinking about them far out from the race. I mean, you can't think about your nutrition 2 weeks before when you're, packing your drop bags and stuff like that. I mean, these are things that you've got to be practicing. The science behind heat training, for example, like that can be done within a few weeks before the race.
Yeah.
Like they've shown that, 10 days out, if you do this, sauna protocol, then, you'll be heat adapted for your race. Nutrition, I think, is something that is constantly evolving and changing, with products and things like that. And so these are things that you need to think about during your runs. Oftentimes I am out before breakfast running, and I've found that, for example, like, taking a bottle of scratch with me, like that teaches me to drink more. Like just having things in your hand. One big thing I always tell my athletes, like, for example, with nutrition, like figure out what pocket is going to hold what. Like my right pocket's always going to hold my gels. My left pocket's always going to hold like my waffles, or something. And it's just practicing and consistent practice with those things. And I think a great thing that athletes can do is to create a log, like whether that's in Training Peaks or on their Strava comments or something like that, saying, hey, this is what I had this run, this is how I felt. That way you can look at that before you start planning for the next one and kind of say, okay, well, what things can I change? Should I eat, should I have more gels before, the 45 minutes that Goo writes on their wrappers, or, you know, can I extend that to an hour?
Yeah.
It's constantly practicing these things. And I think, for athletes out there, one great way to do this is, buying a bunch of different products at your local running store. Now with the feed, I think that's a great place to be able to order a bunch of different things and practice these things, and then discuss these things with your coaches, who, or friends or others who have experience with this, and say, hey, this is what I tried and this is what I felt like. Why did this happen to me? And maybe people can expand upon that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Dude, I feel like that's one of the most important parts of the nutrition thing, right? Like the
mm-hmm,
experimentation and figuring out what's working and what's not. It's, most athletes aren't going to be working with a nutritionist or a sports dietitian. Most athletes are going to be problem solving that stuff on their own, right? Which
mm-hmm,
makes it even more important that you start that process like as early as possible.
mm-hmm.
Um, thinking about a few maybe guideposts to break that down. And then, getting into like, okay, is it a real food option or is it gel option? Is it, at what point do I not like to eat gels anymore? And do I need to have something that's real food? And if it's real food, what is that? Do
Mm-hmm.
I have an A real food that I like and a B real food that I'll use if A stops working or if I don't like
Right.
A anymore? And it's like, wow, that's overwhelming to figure out.
Yeah. And I think too, like, one I read a book one time, and they did kind of this circle diagram. And so like in the middle you had like, you know, I love sugar. So my middle would have been sugar. That's my go-to. Then around that I had salty foods, and then around that you have like savory foods. Like,
Yeah.
what is your least favorite? And you start kind of with the center, and then when the center doesn't work for you, then you move out to the side, and incorporating different flavor profiles too.
Right. I think that's a great way to look at it, as like the center, the outer layer, then the next layer out, and then the oh shit layer at the very
Yeah.
it's just like, oh no,
Yeah.
what else is there left to try? Um, but I do think that that's really helpful for athletes. I just it's such a mistake if you don't start working on your nutrition really, really early,
Mm-hmm.
because it is can be very weather dependent what you like. It can be dependent on how long you've been out there. I mean, there's so many factors that are unknown, but what is known is if you leave it to chance or any guesswork on race day, um, you're going to end up probably having a race that wasn't, the experience you were hoping to have.
Yeah.
You could get derailed by this really, really quickly. When you're thinking about gear, because I feel like gear is kind of like almost in the same category as nutrition, right? Like, actually, I can't believe it's not on the outline here, but it just came to my mind when you're talking about I have gels in this pocket and my waffles in this other pocket.
Mm-hmm.
Testing and knowing your gear well before the race
Mm-hmm.
might also be something that's really important to consider in the planning process. What do you think about that?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, um, like if you're planning to use poles for your race, like learn how you're going to carry them. Are you going to carry them in your pack? Are you going to carry them in your waist? Gloves, things like that. I think there's maybe a few athletes that are doing like UTMB, or even now a lot of American races are requiring certain gear. And I
Mm-hmm.
think having to carry that gear in your pack for some of your long runs, even though it may slow your Strava average time down, I think is crucial, to getting everything out of the race. Like when you think about a race, you want to control every variable that you can, because there's so many variables in the race that are going to happen. So
Yeah.
each and every variable that you can control leading into a race is going to better your outcomes. I mean, going back to the nutrition thing, what do they say? It's like, 80% of the dropouts are typically due to like nausea or something.
Yeah.
So, you know, having those plans going in, can help you be more successful in a race. and then also successful in your training too.
Right. Yeah, it helps you avoid trying something new on race day, which inevitably, if you roll the dice, what's the likelihood of having the outcomes that you want to have? It's
Mm-hmm.
pretty small.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think, the same thing with gear, start early. Oh, this is the pack that I like. I don't like this pack because it chafes me here, or knowing where you're going to be chafed. So you can put some
Mm-hmm.
KT tape there. um, Continuing to like tweak things. I love the talk about the UTMB required gear, because although Leadville, to my knowledge, has no required gear, you could run it with whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
At a race like UTMB, several pounds of gear end up in that pack. And I remember when I was training for CCC a couple years ago, um, I spent 8 weeks doing every long run with all the required gear or the weight equivalent of it.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, by the end of those 8 weeks, like, my pacing was the same with or without the gear. Like, I just got totally used to it and
Mm-hmm.
felt like more of an extension of me as an athlete than this thing that was a hindrance. And so then when I went into the race, it was like no big deal. Like, this is just
Mm-hmm.
what I run in now.
Yeah.
And that helped me a lot. Because it isn't significant at first. It was like, damn, this is heavy. Like,
Yeah.
why would you want to run with this? This makes
Yeah.
my run feel shitty, and I don't like that. But eventually, it felt fine.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what do you think about altitude training, especially for a race like Leadville?
Mm-hmm.
It's up high. It's above 10,000 feet. Most of the race averages like above 10,000 feet.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty extreme for most folks. That's 4,000 feet higher than we live at here
Mm-hmm.
in Carbondale. How do you approach that with athletes? Is that a long-term adaptation process? Is that something like, yeah, we're not really focused on it because your best weapon against altitude is just being fitter? Like, how do you approach that with your folks?
Yeah, I think that there's kind of multiple ways to approach it. I mean, one, obviously, if you can get out to altitude before and experience it, then that's a great option, but
Yeah.
that's few and far between for most people. With some athletes that I coached for Leadville this year, I had them do a lot more um, interval training, short, hard intervals as we got closer to the race, actually, to kind of bring the heart rate up, get the breathing faster, and kind of, get the body used to having to, pump the blood quickly to get more oxygen to
Yeah.
the body. So that was one thing I did, especially with people that were coming from, flatland, things like that. And then obviously they always say, the best, the poor man's altitude is heat.
Yeah.
And growing up in Atlanta, I can definitely attest to that. Like hot, humid days, like you just feel like you're dragging and you're just, wanting to just crawl. And I think that, even living at altitude when you go to train at it, I mean, it can affect you in those ways. And that's the feeling that it gives you, is just sluggishness. Um, and then the other thing that people often forget at altitude, and I've yet to figure out a way to kind of mimic this other than just preach it, is, you've got to drink more, you've got to use more electrolytes. Your diet or your hunger cues are going to be off. You're just going to have to be cognizant of those things. Have you
Yeah.
found any ways to go
No,
about that? No.
no,
Yeah.
if you're an athlete who can get out to do, maybe a training camp weekend at altitude, or um a couple runs up high, before a
Mm-hmm.
big event, those are hugely important experiences, because
Mm-hmm.
you can start to kind of like learn how your body's going to react, and then
Mm-hmm.
you'll know what to expect at the race.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is, it's you can do as many runs as you want at 10,000 feet, but the reality is, unless you're sleeping at 10,000 feet, you're not going to be adapted to 10,000 feet.
Yeah.
You're going to be adapted to whatever altitude you sleep at, and you're going to be used to training up high. And
Mm-hmm.
you might elicit some adaptations as a result of training up high and sleeping down low. And that's awesome, but you're still not going to be adapted to that. So, and if you've got the resources, you can go to an event like Leadville 3 weeks early, and then, you can go through the adaptation process and acclimate to the altitude. But if that's not a reality for you, I would say, go to the race, as in the narrowest window as possible before the race day, so you don't experience the accumulative effects of sleeping up high and being in that stressful environment. And then, the stuff that you mentioned, like how can we mimic in training, like what it might feel like to be up high, training in like really in heat or hot and humid environments, some of those short interval sessions where like your breath rate gets really high and then you have to like really force yourself to regulate. That could be a really good approach. But altitude is really tough. I think fitness is probably the biggest thing. The fitter you are, the less, the more you're going to be able to cope with the challenge.
Yeah, I think, you could potentially take a heat training approach to it, with the altitude, or that increases blood plasma volume, and so you're going to have more of that up there. You could carry one of the oxygen canisters to use at the aid stations.
I think that's illegal at Leadville, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They were founded on Shark Tank. I don't know if you knew that. But
no.
Yeah.
No
they
way.
were on Shark Tank. Yeah.
That's crazy.
So, well, I think we're getting to a wrapping up point here.
Anything you want to add? Anything you think we might have missed or glossed over?
I don't think so. Plan out your races. I think, if you're a self-coached athlete, look ahead. Don't wait till the last minute to start signing up for things. Start kind of planning your season. If you're looking for a coach, Microcosm is looking for athletes. We have great coaches here to, get you paired up with. We have coaches who, are focused more in, just running endurance sports. Some are marathons, some are skimo. Some kind of take a dual pronged approach like myself and use a lot of cycling and to, I guess, build upon my running. So there's a lot of different coaches that we have for each and every athlete out there.
Heck yeah. And if you got a question, a topic you want us to address on a future call, give us a shout, microcosm-coaching.com or microcosmcoaching@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you guys.
TJ and Zack out.
Thank you.